What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 15 of Value Town. I'm your host, ChanManV, and got a special show today. Going to be talking about balanced philosophies as well as the patch that is either in the process of coming out or has just come out, at least in NA. All you Europeans have had a chance to play with some of the changes. But want to welcome our guest today, Eric, and my co-host each and every week, Kripp. What's up, fellas?
Hey, how's it going? Awesome to be here.
Yeah, it feels like you were just here like 2 weeks ago or something, Eric.
I don't know.
Like 4 weeks ago.
It totally feels like it.
But it's always a pleasure having you, and thanks for taking some time out of your day. I'm sure you're super busy with everything that's going on right now.
Yep, it's a busy time, but I got time for you guys.
Awesome. Kripp, how's Berlin, man?
Well, Berlin is the same as it was a month ago, and if it's any different, I'm probably too tired to notice the differences. Trump isn't here because he doesn't function quite as well under severe sleep deprivation as I do, I suppose. So we'll be missing one of the regular guests, and Trump will continue to avoid Eric here for some time.
I see how it is. That's what's going on. Okay, I see. But yeah, so we're going to kick things off by talking about balance philosophy. And Eric just came out with a blog post that kind of talks about, I guess, what the team thinks about whenever they're making these balance changes. And I'm going to link it here and let you guys take a look at it. Let me link it in the chat first, and then I'll bring it up on screen here. Talking about just some of the points, we kind of go over just really the bold face, and then we can talk a little bit about the details. Talk about the first one. A card uses non-interactive or causes non-interactive games, and I think this one has a lot to do with a lot of the OTK charge changes that you've made recently. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, absolutely. That's one of the most important things to us when the game is being played, is that it's fun for both players. And if a game ends up being a game where you're like, okay, I'm going to delay, kind of stop anything you do, delay, not put much on the board, and then suddenly win out of nowhere, it's probably really fun for the person playing in that style, but it's not super fun for the person playing against that style. And certainly it's not to say there isn't strategy there, because there absolutely is. But there's certainly less, and in a lot of ways that strategy is only kind of at the very highest level. So it's really important for us that each turn, when you're playing the game, you're looking at the board and going, okay, these are the things they might have in their hand. This is what they have on the board. What's the right thing to do? I have all of these variables to figure out. And if the meta ever evolves to, hey, look, it's, to use some previous decks, hey, it's the warrior enraged worgen charge deck versus a mage freeze pyro deck. It'd be pretty darn boring in a lot of ways. So it more important than any specific class or any of that is that the game is super fun to play for both sides, and there's a lot of interaction even at the highest levels.
Okay, Kripp, any comments on
that? Yeah, I just have to take a second to get back to me here.
Okay, so my question is, it's okay. Kripp's like very sleep deprived, guys. So, but I have a question about, I guess, just in general, this OTK. Are you just going to remove OTK altogether, or just really discourage it? Because some of the changes, we're kind of jumping a little bit to the patches, but you are still allowing like some scenarios, I guess, with the OTK Hunter, and unlike where with the OTK Warrior, unlike with the Unleash the Hounds, where I think you just completely removed that combo. So is OTK charge just going to be completely removed from the game?
In general, our goal, I mean, it depends what you mean. If there's one turn kill where I did some damage over the course of the game and I can do 15 or 20 damage this turn, I mean, it's a lot, and you've got to build the right combo for that, but that's still okay. But decks that are generating a situation where you're delaying and they have 30 or 40 or for instance, even 50 health,
right. Okay.
and you can kill them in one turn from just your hand, that's something that's just we're not looking for, and we're going to if we see other combinations that feel very strong in that way, we'll definitely be talking about what to do with that going forward. So, yeah, OTK is not something that we are excited about at all.
Well, mostly OTK charge is kind of what was my point, more so than OTK on the board, because you can react to OTK on the board at least.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Let's see. Next up, it's
Well,
card.
hold on.
Oh,
You
go
got
ahead.
back to me.
Yeah, yeah, go. Yeah, yeah. Get back
Got
to you.
it.
Here you go.
Okay. Well, it feels that like the OTK stuff, when you play other players who know what's going on, every turn is like strategic.
Yeah.
But I feel like if I was a new player and I just queued up, I just made a deck full of wisps and stuff like that. And, nothing's happening, and then I'd die in one turn. I wouldn't learn anything at all from that game. And I feel it's mostly a cater to that. Is that true, or is there just you guys feel there's a certain way you want the game being played?
I agree at the very highest levels. There's definitely strategy involved when you're playing against an OTK deck. I think that it's well, it's hard for me to say. I think that there might be a little bit less there, but for me, more importantly, what's going to happen is whenever one of these decks gains popularity, tons and tons of people are going to be playing that deck. So even if there's a deck that only our very top pro level players you know are developing, all of our players are going to end up playing that deck. It's just how it goes. It's just going to be net decked, and that's going to be prevalent across the environment. And so it's a little bit of, we want to have that little bit more strategy, despite the fact that, as I said before, there's definitely strategy in playing against an OTK. But it's also partially that we want to make sure that those decks are not just the prevalent decks that end up having everyone playing across all levels, because they will. They're not going to just build the Wisp decks. They're going to go and look up what you guys are playing, and that's the deck they're going to be playing.
Do you consider Holy Wrath OTK? Are we in jeopardy here?
It is OTK in some instances, but
I am not too concerned at this time. But again, it's one of those things that we're paying a lot of attention to across the board, and a lot of the changes that we've made recently, because we certainly made a lot of changes recently, like a whole bunch of changes in this patch. And the goal is kind of to make a bunch of changes that we think are going to make the game better 3 months and 6 months and whatnot from now. So hopefully 6 months from now, when we're live, we won't be having to make any changes. That's our intention.
okay.
Are we able to predict the future? Absolutely not. But can I try to say that our goal is to make a bunch of changes now so that we don't have to make very many or any changes later, and that's absolutely our goal.
Okay. Let's move on to the next one. A card is frustrating to play against, and Pyroblast is listed here. And Pyroblast obviously was one of the changes. A lot of the community was asking for a higher mana cost to it. Talk about, I guess, this general philosophy and then Pyroblast change in particular.
Well, it's very related to the one-turn kill, or related to the non-interactive game state. It's I'm playing mage, I basically just sort of delay the game via ice blocks or frost or whatever tactic you use to delay the game, and then it's as if you only had 10 life, or frankly probably 8 life, because if I have those 2 pyroblasts, that's 22 damage probably. And because it's creating, again, a non-interactive state, it's pretty frustrating to play against. Really, my preference to talk on this one, or a better example of it, even though Pyroblast is an example of it, is to talk about Mind Control. And Mind Control was definitely one that we changed because it was mostly frustrating to play against. It's just Pyroblast is sort of halfway between those two states. It's a card that you're playing along and you think everything's fine, and suddenly the game ends suddenly and you don't know what the heck happened, and you're like, I don't feel like I could have done anything, etc. So in a lot of ways, it's connected to non-interactive and OTK.
Do you feel like you really solved the problem by making it 10 instead of 8? Like 10 damage versus 11 damage is still, pretty much around there.
It's around there. It delays it by a couple of turns and reduces the damage by a little bit. So the answer is I don't know. The goal is to make it so that mages are still the masters of direct damage. And I think that this is going to bring it down enough so that you're not going to see this in a prevalent sort of way, like everybody plays mages and then they all play Pyroblast at the end. I certainly don't mind Pyroblast. In fact, I think it's good to have Pyroblast in the environment if it's just a tool that gets used against certain deck types in the meta that causes problems for that deck type, rather than, well, you just run mage and you run delay and pyro, and that's just a strong deck across the board.
Yeah. I mean, I think delaying 2 turns will be pretty significant in the mage deck, but we'll see how people react to it.
I think it's pretty significant,
Yeah.
but when we get to the other changes with like a lot of the aggro decks being punished,
Yeah, yeah.
you may just get another 2 turns.
Well, that's true too. Okay, let's move on. We'll get there in a second too. A card is causing confusion or isn't intuitive enough. Was there any particular one? Any particular change in this recent patch that has to do with this?
In a very light sort of way, because the Blood Imp change, it one of the great counters to a rush deck, especially, well, other than Blood Imp, especially a Warlock rush deck, would be to use the equality with the Pyromancer to light up
Yes.
the board and take everybody out. And it felt pretty non-intuitive to players, especially players who are coming from like Magic the Gathering, when they use a combo like that and it actually doesn't make things go away the way they thought they would. So, like the Blood Imp change was to address that very lightly. It wasn't the most important reason we made that change.
I was
but
gonna say if that was the most important. That would have been surprising.
It was definitely to address that in a light sort of way. So that's certainly an example. I mean, this blog post was intended to address sort of all changes we've made and changes in the future. So the Frostwolf Warlord was probably the best case for this, which the Frostwolf Warlord used to be a card that, depending on the number of allies you had, its health would go up and down. And doing the math on it just made your brain hurt, and you had to try to figure out what the heck is going to happen. I'll kill him, and it'll become this, and then, oh, wait, but he already had damage on him, so it won't become that. And it was just very, very complicated. And so specifically the reason
I loved that card. You'd heal it forever when you played Paladin for common.
That's true. That's true.
It was just so complicated, though, to play against, and an awful lot of players who were playing against that card, things would happen that they wouldn't anticipate. And that's why we changed it to be a battle cry, so it's a fixed amount, so you're not watching its health wobble all over the place as all kinds of things happen on the board. So that's a perfect example of a card we changed, because it was causing confusion to our players.
Okay, so the next two, they're kind of related, and given that we just talked about the Blood Imp, I figure maybe we skip one and then we'll go back to it. So let's talk about a build and a style of play that's too strong. Given some of the changes, especially to Blood Imp and to Dark Iron Dwarf and even to Defender of Argus, I feel like the board control, even aggro type of archetypes were. It was intended to maybe nerf some of those, particularly the Warlock one. Was that the case? And why the Warlock? Because I felt like the Warlock was starting to drop a little bit with the rise of the warrior decks and some of these very control heavy removal decks.
Actually, we made very few changes based on the current state of the meta.
Okay.
And I think that we get in trouble, actually, when we start making too many changes based on the meta. Because if we made changes a couple of months ago based on the meta, where in some ways not a lot of things have changed with the Paladin, we would have hit the Paladin. And the Paladin is certainly not a class that, at least right now in the arc of the meta, we're seeing at the very top levels. But I wouldn't be surprised if we saw it in another few weeks. I'm mostly saying that the meta is changing so much right now that our changes were focused on things were confusing, or most importantly, non-interactive game board or game states, or to bring up something you're probably going to talk about in a minute, to address minions that were very good for their cost, which actually was leading to a lack of diversity because everybody was running those minions, and so it made the game less diverse and thus less interesting. So those were primarily why we made changes.
Okay.
I'm trying to think. It was a light modification, or that was the intention to Warlock with the Blood Imp, but for the most part, the changes were intended to affect other things rather than the meta, because the meta is still shifting. I have no idea where it'll end up landing, if it'll end up landing somewhere, but it's still in motion.
Yeah, Kripp, you wanna comment about, I guess, the Dark Iron Dwarf Argus changes in the Blood Imp?
I mean, I think all those cards are still good except Blood Imp. I think we won't be seeing that card anymore at all. And I mean, I can't say I feel bad about it, but it seems that very often when these cards get nerfed, they get like just finished. Like you never see them again.
Yeah.
and I really feel Blood Imp is going to be one of those cards.
Yeah, it's one of the challenges we have with cards like Blood Imp that have one cost is we're always talking internally about the amount of granularity we have in changes that we can make, and what change can we make to still make the card good but not make it too bad. And when it's one cost, the amount of numbers we have to play with is pretty limited. And in some cases, like for instance, the change that was made to the charge, for instance, that's definitely a change that dramatically affects that card. And that was intended because where that card got used was in a very narrow case, in a pretty abusive case. But to take a step back, I can say for the most part, our intention, where we can, is to take a card that's too powerful, if there is a card like that, and make it slightly less powerful. So for instance, Defender of Argus, changing it from a 3/3 to a 2/3, I think it's still a really strong card.
Yeah.
It's still going to see play, and that's absolutely the intention. We don't want to flip-flop cards like that unless we actually feel like we really have to. So stuff like Argus, we intend to see play, whereas cards like Charge, I agree. I don't know how much play it's going to see in the future. It's definitely a significant change. It's just the very nature of that card made it very difficult to make effects that would make it see play that wouldn't end up being abused. Or seeing play in that way.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
So one card I think that has the attributes of being super popular in every deck that I think he just slightly nerfed this time, or just upped at least the mana cost, with Sylvanas, right? I think that's by far the most play. I mean, literally, I think I don't know, maybe one deck that doesn't run it right now. Talk to us about that and why you didn't really significantly change this card at all.
Because it's super fun.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a good answer. That's a good answer.
I love Sylvanas. It's super fun to play against. When Sylvanas hits the table, the way you are thinking about the game suddenly changes pretty significantly, assuming you don't have a silence or something like that. So it's a super fun card to play. We like how the card plays. It was just that it was seeing, as you said, play in every deck. And for any given card, we want you to be thinking about, should this card go in this deck, rather than, hey, I'm making a deck. Well, of course I throw in Sylvanas, and then I throw in this other stuff. So it's an attempt to dial it back a little and still keep the fun of the card.
I am going to miss the Brawl Sylvanas play, man. I used to love that play.
Still possible with the coin.
Oh, true. With the coin, you can still do it. Yeah, to save it till turn 10, though.
I feel like the main reason Sylvanas was good is just it was in a spot where there was no other legendaries. Like, legendaries in general are good, except for the low-cost ones, and all of those suck pretty much. So you have, like, this creeping in of legendaries, and it just started with Sylvanas, and with decks being fast, Sylvanas was just, like, good enough, cheap enough, works in every situation. And I feel like if you reduce, like, the stat points of a lot of the legendaries and made them cheaper, you could see a lot of diversity in their play. Like Malagos, for instance. You could just make him a crappy creature, and just people would use him for the spell damage.
Yeah, so one of the things you're talking about is specifically another point we made in the blog post, which is about buffing creatures or buffing cards. And that's something that we're really trying to dial back on, because the ecosystem is right now, it feels pretty balanced, at least as far as how the metagame is shifting and whatever. And we've definitely seen cases over alpha and early beta where we made little tiny changes to cards, and it actually had huge impacts on the metagame. So that's why we're being pretty careful about it. I mean, the only change we made in the recent patch was, or buff that we made, was Unleash the Hounds. So what you can expect is in the future we'll be adding more cards that you can expect to see strengths in various areas and that sort of thing. But we really don't expect to see any more. Well, I shouldn't say any more, because that'll get me in trouble.
Yeah.
But it's something that we're dialing way back because of the possibilities of create unanticipated ripples in sort of the metagame, especially given that we don't know where it's going to land.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there hasn't been enough time, I guess, even with some of the patch changes, for the metagame to fully develop, because a lot of things came up even since the last patch, even recently in the last 2 or 3 weeks, with like the warrior decks and everything, right, becoming very, very prevalent. So it's kind of cool that you're taking that approach. As for UTH, as for Unleash the Hounds, why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because that is one, that was the big change last patch, and it seems like you guys are modifying that, based on just the data that you're seeing. So was it too weak? Was it just never being played even at the casual levels, or what were you seeing?
It wasn't quite strong enough, and actually that's sort of an example of when we put a new card in like that, we add Unleash the Hounds, we were very conservative with its mana cost. We didn't want to go, let's drive this card right to the razor's edge of where we think it's going to be super competitive, because we don't know where the metagame's going, and we don't know all of the shifts and turns that are going to happen. So we were a little bit, I would say, a little bit too conservative when we first put it in there. And it's certainly intended to be a playable card. It's intended to be potentially, depending on the deck you're running with Hunters, a Hunter AoE style card that you can do some interesting things with. And at 4 cost, it was just not serving those functions. Mm-hmm. And at 2 cost, it allows a lot of the interesting combinations that you can do with Unleash the Hounds with other cards that trigger off beasts entering play or dying or all of those sorts of things. Yeah. So it was just, I think, a case of us being a little bit too cautious when we first put it in, realized we'd been a little bit too cautious, realized Hunters that needed a little bit of love, and so boosting it a little there.
Yeah, I'm excited to see it.
Why did they need some love? I'm curious. Did something happen to them a short while ago?
No, I'm excited. Like I know a lot of people are going to be retaking a look at Hunter, and has a lot to do with this change, and maybe just in general, just getting some attention actually leads people to start developing some metagame around the class a little bit more, instead of just I guess denouncing it. Like Warrior, right? Warriors were one of the worst classes like how many weeks ago, and then now we're looking at relevant decks like at the high levels, so it's pretty cool. Why don't we just go ahead and talk about the Novice Engineer too? Kripp, do you have any? Yeah, I'm interested to hear your comments on the Novice Engineer.
Got this going. I'm a little bit more awake. Who cares about Novice? I hate that card. But
what? Okay.
It's just super annoying. But anyway, I mean, you mentioned adding new cards. Obviously, I'm sure you don't have many specifics, but it's one of those inevitable things. Like, you're going to have to eventually add new cards. So what's like the development process to that? Like, do you try to fill in like the gaps? Like, we kind of need a 4-drop stealth creature. Like, how does that begin? Like, what can we really expect to see in the very general sense?
Wow, that's a big question to answer, because we look at it from a bunch of different directions, and our development process has been, somebody comes up with a bunch of card ideas and they pitch in, and I think we need this for this reason, and here's a bunch of other cards and they would be really cool, and we're bouncing back and forth card ideas for a bunch of different reasons. Specifically, though, we do look at the metagame and go, here's a couple of decks that are strong. Let's make sure that we put tools in there. And of course, these are all cards that are from the future, but of course, we're talking about future cards. But we definitely look at the metagame and go, we need to make sure that players have tools for dealing with metagame twists and turns. And you can even sort of see that in cards that we have in the existing environment. You look at Hungry Crab, which every time anyone thinks about playing that makes me all giddy, because it's certainly an edge card, and it's a card that right now isn't very strong, but if Murloc ever becomes super strong, that card becomes awesome. And so making sure that we have cards like that in the environment that lets a player go, the metagame is shifting this way, I think that I might want to be including a specific card that addresses the metagame in a certain way. And in general, our goal is to not nerf things that are too strong, although it may not necessarily look like that. A lot of the changes we're making were for the non-interactivity reasons, not for the balance reasons. But our goal is to then later add cards that will let the players address that if a specific strategy gets too strong.
That's an interesting approach, because I think a lot of I've seen in other games they kind of have the balance between, like, at least in the metagame, be the most prominent thing and not affecting that. So think that's kind of interesting, and you're kind of relying on the community and everybody to just evolve the metagame based on what you give us. That's kind of neat. I do want to talk about novice though, Griff. All right, so all right, so 1-1. Okay, making it a 1-1. So I want to first point out that it's always been a choice between novice and loot. I think those two cards have always, if you were only going to play 2 cantrips, it was like a mutually exclusive thing. I think for most decks. And now making it, and the reason it was is because of the durability of the novice. That 2 health, I think, was a big reason why it is the most popular between the two right now. You don't die to hero powers and stuff like that. So why make it a 1-1 now? Because I feel like almost everybody's going to, between the choices now, I think most people will run the loot hoarder just based on the extra damage.
I think that if you felt like you needed a cantrip, you might run the loot hoarder now, but to take a step back, the reason we made that change is that from looking at our data, and we of course can look at a broad spectrum of what cards people are running in decks at all levels and at the highest levels, and we saw that Novice Engineer was being run in almost everybody's decks. And if you compare Novice Engineer to Loot Hoarder, it actually has a couple of advantages that I feel like makes it a stronger card. Certainly, one of them is that if you are playing Novice Engineer late game, you get the card right now, which lets you chain directly into the solution. So late game, if you're like talking 8, 9, 10 mana and you don't have a full hand of cards, you have a not as full a hand of cards. Playing Novice Engineer, it's almost like a free guy because you're going to play him and then play whatever is coming behind him. Whereas the Loot Hoarder, you're actually delaying a turn, which it's a significant impact. And the other thing is, of course, that the Loot Hoarder with 1 health means it's pretty vulnerable to Druid, Mage, Rogue early game. So it's great, you get it out there and you get a card, but you don't keep something on the table. And there's a lot of strategies that involve, I have a guy on the table and he actually remains on the table, and then I can buff him, do all kinds of stuff to that specific card and power him up. So certainly in our discussions about it, we felt like the Novice Engineer was actually a little bit stronger. And when we looked at what cards people were playing, the community felt like that was the case as well, in that it was overwhelming how many more of our high-level players were playing Novice Engineer rather than Loot Hoarder.
Okay.
And actually to address the sort of the base, why did we do this in the first place? It was because so many people were running it, and it was because we felt like there was less diversity in the game because everybody was choosing that card. It was going in everybody's decks. It was like Sylvanas. It's like, okay, I'm building a deck. Well, I'll put in 2 Novice Engineers. I'll put in my Sylvanas. Okay, now what else should I put in the deck? And while that wasn't true 100% of the time, an awful lot of the time it was true. And so that's why we made that change. Okay.
Why don't we move on to a few more questions, and then I kind of want to get a few of the community questions too, just to kind of generate some discussion. Want to bring up the warrior change. So I put the warrior, just all the patch changes up on the screen now. So we kind of talked a little bit about it, pretty much removing a lot of the OTK combos. There were many, there were like probably 3 or 4 different OTK options for the warrior. And the one that remains probably is the Worgen combo. I mean, I think that's the only one you can maybe make work at this point. I have a couple questions. One of them, I feel like Molten Giant's been one of the big cards being discussed in the community, and that's one of the combos that we're talking about with Warrior. And Molten Giant being basically 0 mana, right? And in a lot of these different decks, when they're played, was that a big issue with this? Did you consider changing Molten Giant, like to actually nerf some of these or just nerf some of these decks that you were seeing problems with?
We've certainly over time talked about Molten Giants a lot, and the fact that it can cost 0 in the cases where that can become a problem. But that's actually one of the reasons why we like Molten Giant, because it's super exciting that you can look at that card and go, that can cost 0. I can do all kinds of crazy stuff with that. And sort of as I was talking about before, the reason we made the changes to those charge cards was not necessarily for the game as it stands today. This is trying to look at 3 months and 6 months and however else longer out there, and it would mean that anytime we were adding a card that had the potential to do a lot of damage, we'd have to go, okay, how is that going to combine with the warrior charge cards? What's going to be the OTK that's going to come out of it, and how is that going to limit our design space? And what we would rather do is be able to make crazy cards like Molten Giant that could conceivably be free without being constrained by these other specific cards. So in this specific case, sure, we could have looked at Molten Giant, although we would have had to look at Worgen as well,
Okay.
and some other stuff. But for the long haul, we felt like bringing Charge back in gives us lots of opportunities, not only now but in the future, to make interesting and exciting cards like that that don't end up crossing over into the delay the game and then I win in one turn.
Okay. Kripp, any comments on just, I guess, the patches? Any derivative questions from any of the changes in the patches?
Well, I mean, we missed a pretty big topic here. I mean, I just play Arena all the time.
Oh, yeah,
I don't really
Arena.
care
Absolutely.
what the meta game is happening. So when I see mages getting nerfed, I'm like, yes. But Fireball is actually still Fireball, and sometimes mages have 5 of them.
Oh
So,
man, that's brutal.
do you guys consider what's going on in an arena when you make any of these changes?
Yeah, we certainly talk about it, and certainly you could get 5 fireballs in the deck, but there's certainly an awful lot of other cards that I could mention that you could get 5 or 8 of. I certainly was had some friends talking about a match where their opponent had like 8 frostbolts or something like that, and a lot of the
That did happen
joy.
to me, actually. So,
Oh, okay, it happened to you too. Awesome. But one of
yeah.
the, to me, one of the, well, one of the exciting things about Arena is that you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what you're going to be matched against. I mean, when you're playing a ranked game, you're definitely going, okay, he dropped his first fireball. I sort of know what to expect, rather than, okay, he's played 2, he's played 3. What? That's crazy. And somebody who builds that deck, which, while it can happen, it doesn't happen huge amount of the time. Somebody who builds that deck, they are very successful and they get up to 7 or 8 wins, and then they start getting matched against people who also have ridiculous sets of cards and a ridiculous amount of skill, and those games get pretty interesting as well, watching 2 people who are very skilled with some very odd and potentially very powerful decks because of the number of cards of a specific type they chose doing
Yeah.
battle. It creates pretty fun stuff.
I think you're absolutely right on that. But then this creates like a complete inverse to the OTK stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
the only thing less exciting than 5 fireballs is 6 fireballs. Like it's not exciting to be on the receiving end. And I mean, you know, in constructed, you kind of go with one mindset, and in arena, it's the exact opposite, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you at least have that expectation. You can do something preventative, to prepare for it. In Arena, like Kripp said, it's unpredictable. So,
It's a different
that's a very
realm.
good point.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very different style of play, and we like having a very different style of play. And I actually can say I was playing in a recent arena match against somebody who had a whole lot of fireballs. And of course, they didn't have them all at once, and I ended up just soaking them because I put out threats and they'd have to deal with it, and I put out threats and they'd have to deal with it. And eventually I realized that was an awful lot of fireballs you've used to deal with my threats, but it it just played out in that specific way. But yes, it is a wilder style than the more in control and a style of ranked, I guess.
Would you say your balancing does favor the constructed side of things more so than Arena?
We certainly pay more attention to constructed than arena because, again, in arena we don't know what's going to happen at all. But we're certainly watching arena, and we're certainly playing an awful lot of arena and experiencing that for ourselves. So when things come up in arena, we definitely look at them and talk about them. But it hasn't been our focus as much as ranked because it's such a wild style. It depends if you're running into. I guess to take a step back, one of our most important things is to make sure that the game is fun for both players and that doesn't turn into a non-interactive thing. And while I agree there can be edge cases where the person gets dealt 4 fireballs and the game is just fireball, 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 I haven't seen that, really. It happens
Well,
just super rarely. I guess it depends
usually
how
what
often
tends
you're
to happen
streaming
is you
arena.
play like a rogue. Yeah, you play like a rogue, you keep attacking into their creatures, taking damage. They keep pinging off your creatures and not taking damage. You're sitting with like 2 assassinates in your hand, and then you get fireballed. And it's like, oh, okay, I guess it didn't really work out.
Yeah, and we certainly pay attention to class balance in arena as well. So it's definitely stuff we're watching.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I have a pretty cool idea, and I think it'll be fun for you, and I think it'll be really fun for the chat. So this is my idea, and you let me know if you're interested. So the chat can help out with like maybe some cards because I'm pretty brain dead right now. but we're gonna like name cards, and you're gonna give your personal opinion, which does not reflect Blizzard or the development team in any way, of whether the card is underpowered, balanced, or overpowered. Would you like to play this game?
All right. This is good.
I will give you my personal opinion about some of these cards, but I'm also going to give my personal opinion about whether I like them or not as well, because there's a whole bunch of different reasons for a card to be in the set. And so, for instance, if you said Angry Chicken, I might say, card is interesting, it's fun, it's probably not going to see a lot of high-level ranked play, but still a super fun card and still a worthy card. But anyway, go ahead.
Okay, I will start it off. Wisp.
Trump would have started off with Wisp.
I think that that's a super interesting card because I think that there's the possibility of there being decks out there that get up to a very, very fast start and buff them. I don't know if there's any of those decks out there right now, but that's a card that's out there to provide interesting possibilities for the metagame. I think that for me, in a lot of ways, that it's a little bit less narrow, but sort of like the Hungry Crab in that it's a card that you can look at that card and go, I wonder if I can make a deck that works like that. Can you right now? I don't know for sure. But is there a possibility that you can make one right now? Sure. And is there a possibility you'll be able to make one like that in the future? Sure. So that's sort of where Wisp stands.
All right, next card.
So, balance?
It all depends on what you mean if balanced, right? Is Black Knight a balanced card? In an environment where nobody is running Taunt, it's a pretty terrible card. In an environment where everybody's running Taunt, it's a pretty good card. So you have to talk about the metagame and where the metagame stands to talk about whether a card's balanced, and it's shifting all over the place. So that's the problem with saying whether a card is balanced or not. You can only say whether it's balanced within the constraints of where the metagame stands today. And I would hesitate to do that because I'll get quoted on it, and a week from now it'll be different.
Yeah, but
and
that's the point.
Exactly.
I know, but that's what I'm
Exactly.
saying. Is it's shifting all over the place, right?
All right.
Okay, it looks like another.
I'll
So
throw. Maybe I can inspire you a little bit better with this next card. Eye for an eye.
where's I don't see an eye for an eye in this chat. Where'd you get that from? Okay, all right. Eye for an eye.
Eye for an eye is I think it falls into a lot of the same category. I mean, if it means that, well, I guess this is a tricky thing because whenever you see a secret, it means there's a possibility that it's an eye for an eye. It's pretty unlikely, but there's a possibility, and that means if you're playing high damage decks, like if I'm playing a Pyro deck or whatever, eye for an eye can be pretty powerful. I think that in the current environment, it's not super powerful. I just think it makes that secrets more interesting because there's the possibility of that being there. And I also will say that cards don't necessarily have to be right now played at the highest level of play for them to be an interesting card. We talked about Arena a little bit earlier, and very often you're presented with a bunch of cards that you're like, do I take Hungry Crab or Eye for an Eye? You know, you get presented with this crazy mix of cards, and you choose one of those cards, and then your opponent plays against it and is very surprised because they didn't expect that to be happening in the environment. So
I would
Right.
also
I
be
know I'm
very
not-
surprised to see Hungry Crab versus Eye for an Eye.
well, that's actually not, yeah.
Okay.
But you know what I mean. Often you're
Yeah.
presented with a bunch of cards that none of them are quite optimal, and so you just, okay, I guess we'll pick this one, and then your opponent's very surprised, and sometimes it works out super well and makes for a great story, you know, that sort of thing.
Well, I was hoping to get you in some trouble. It looks like that's not happening. We'll go with the chat favorite to end this series with Naz Dormu.
That's dude. Okay. It's
the
either
chat
Naz Dormu.
favorite.
It's either Naz Dormu or it's oh gosh, it's either Naz Dormu or it's the kidnapper card.
All right. Well, you can give your 2 cents on either one
Yeah.
if you can.
Choose.
I really think that Naz Dormu is a super interesting card, and to me, sometimes what cards do is they are there to inspire you to think about the game in a different way and to change up how the game is being played. Again, is it going to be seeing play at the highest level of play? Probably not right now, but when it does come out, when you're playing an arena or playing it even in mid-level ranked or whatever, does that happen and you go, oh my goodness, I've got to think about this game entirely differently. It's mind blown if you're not used to playing against it. Absolutely. So cards are put into the environment for a whole bunch of different reasons, and they're not all necessarily there to be competitive at the highest level of play in ranked decks. And in fact, they can't, because cards are all in comparison to each other, right? So a player is going to look at all the cards we put out there, and it's like, of these 10 cards, which is the best 8-drop?
Yeah.
And or the best 5 8-drops, or the ones that are going to work within this style of deck.
Yeah, I mean, I actually really love the text on North Dormu, but have you ever considered putting it on a smaller minion so that it would be potentially played more instead of a legendary that, a lot of people, there's just so many
perhaps a
legendaries.
stackable minion reduces the turn duration by 30 seconds.
Wow, yeah, yes, that would be
Get
good.
down to 2-second turns.
Yeah, and then you do, if you have more cards than your opponent in your deck, you do OTK by playing that card and facelessing it.
That's a super fun idea.
That's a new way of looking at OTK. Yes.
We've certainly talked about playing with that mechanic more, and it certainly is not going to be anything like that for Ship, but it's certainly a mechanic that we have discussed.
Okay. All right. So I wanted to get one community question here, and we don't have much time left. So let me get one question, and then we'll do some shout-outs. So there's one question that I think last time some people were asking that I didn't get a chance to ask, and they wanted to know about Sylvanas. Okay. Sylvanas against Sylvanas. What happens when they kill each other, and what is the order, the death rattles, and all that good stuff? Can you talk about that or clarify that a bit for us?
Sure, that's the timing of events that are happening effectively simultaneously it's tricky. It's very hard to display. It doesn't happen a ton, but it definitely does happen. And how it works is depends on the order that the cards were put into the environment. So depending on which Sylvanas was played first, it determines which one's going to trigger first.
Oh, okay. Well, hopefully everybody knows now the answer to that, because a lot of people have thought it's random and a lot of different hypotheses on it. So.
It's definitely something that we have talked about a significant amount internally, about how to deal with things that trigger at the same time. And when you're trying to take a game and keep the text and presentation very easy to understand, when you get into these cases like this, it gets very difficult to create good presentation that's going to tell you exactly what's going to happen when all of these things occur. But it's certainly stuff that we have been and are still talking about. It's certainly important to make even these edge cases like this clear to players. I just don't know what the solution is yet.
Okay. Any last thoughts, Kripp, for Eric before we wrap up?
Well, we probably won't be seeing Sylvanas versus Sylvanas as much anymore. So
yeah.
We've averted the problem for now.
Yeah, that's true. But Eric, thanks again for coming on. It was a pleasure having you on. It's always a pleasure having you on. And again, thanks for taking out the time from your busy day to talk some Hearthstone with us. And I can't wait to try out the patch after the show. And any shout outs or things you want to do?
No, it's always great to be here. Heck, talking Hearthstone is what I love to do, so this is easy for me to do. I love talking to you guys. It's just super fun. So thanks a lot for having me on the show.
Kripp, thank you. Shout outs?
Yep, it was fun attempting to troll Eric a little bit. He seems to have some internet skills, so we'll have to try harder next time. But it was fun.
He's an expert, man.
I look forward to
it. For me, I'd like to thank both of you guys, especially again Eric for coming out, and Kripp for you being in Berlin and attending, because I didn't want you guys to miss this interview, because we missed the last one with you guys. But I guess we can.
One more quick shout out.
Okay, go for it.
Nix wants a shout out, so this is
Max.
the shout out that he wants.
Right. Shout out to
And
Max.
as it turns out, if you ask for stuff, sometimes you get the stuff you ask for. This is the case. Congratulations.
Awesome. But for those of you, obviously, thanks for the viewers for watching this, and hopefully got a lot of the questions that you guys wanted to ask answered. And you can check out the VODs if you missed any of the show on youtube.com/ChanManV. You can follow us on Twitter at ChanManV, at Kripparrian, and Eric, what's your Twitter? Do you have a Twitter? I couldn't find your Twitter, actually.
Nope.
No Twitter. What? But you can follow Eric on the Hearthstone forums and hopefully actually comment on the blog that he posted about the philosophies there. I'm sure he'll appreciate your opinions on it.
Yeah, totally appreciate those opinions, and we'll absolutely be reading all of those, all of that feedback.
Yeah. But anyways, guys, that's going to be it for Value Town this week. So for Kripparrian, Eric Dodds, and ChanManV, we will see you next time. Later.